The death of Jaehaerys Targaryen at the hands of Blood and Cheese and at the command of Daemon Targaryen is one of the most shocking moments in Fire and Blood. And while House of the Dragon's presentation of the event was less gruesome, it was no less horrifying. Daemon's role in the Dance of the Dragons is hard to quantify, but it's undeniable that this civil war would not have happened without his involvement or interference. However, he's hardly the only character that anyone could say that about. It was always a foregone conclusion that the Blood and Cheese incident would have to be altered for the TV adaptation, as the original version of events is essentially unfilmable and unairable. But one of the most interesting changes that many viewers picked up on was Daemon's seemingly diminished role in the execution of Aegon II's heir. While the book never explicitly explained the agreement that was reached between Daemon and his hired assassins, because Jaehaerys died and because this act of vengeance was so directly stated as a son for a son, most book readers understandably assumed that Jaehaerys' death was Daemon's goal from the jump. And there are a few different angles from which this apparent change seems to diminish the story as a whole, as well as diminishing Daemon's responsibility for this heinous act. Most viewers who don't see the Greens as outright villains were frustrated by this narrative choice because basically, they already get a bad rap. And by watering down what is arguably the most appalling crime committed by the Blacks, it makes it even easier to see Rhaenyra and her supporters as protagonists that are truly more deserving of the throne than Aegon and his supporters. But another common criticism that seems to hold weight across the board regardless of any personal character or team preferences is that House of the Dragon already wrote the death of Lucerys, the event that made the Dance of the Dragons into a civil war, an accident. Again, while Fire and Blood presented this as a fight that turned fatal, Aemond's intentions in House of the Dragon were clearly to terrorize his nephew, not terminate him. Similarly, although it's more minor in comparison to Luke's killing, Alicent decides to push for Aegon to become king not because it's in his best interest, in her best interest, or because if she doesn't, she and her family could potentially be executed to cement Rhaenyra's claim, but because she misunderstands the last word she hears from Viserys and sincerely believes that he had a change of heart about Aegon taking the throne. So, to put Daemon in a narrative position where he sends 2 assassins to kill the adult man who is responsible for Luke's death, only for his hitmen to go rogue and choose an easier but completely unintended target, once again seems to paint the Dance of the Dragons as some kind of comedy of errors rather than an intentional battle between 2 factions of the same family. However, I think that this surface-level interpretation of what happened is incorrect, and it's easy to see what Daemon's potential motivations and expectations were when he found 2 dirt-poor strangers to supposedly kill Aemond Targaryen. Firstly and most obviously, it's clear that Daemon did not intend for Blood and Cheese to kill Aemond. He says as much in his conversation with them. He knows that Aemond would easily slaughter both of them without even catching a wound, and from their reactions and their ultimate choices, it's obvious that Blood and Cheese know that as well. So that obviously lends itself to the question, if Daemon knew that Blood and Cheese couldn't kill Aemond, then was he simply sending them on a kamikaze mission? And if he was, what was the driving force behind that? Traveling all the way to King's Landing to send 2 men all the way into the royal quarters of the Red Keep, with the expectation that they will simply be killed by their quarry, doesn't make sense. And someone as tactically experienced as Daemon wouldn't make such an absurd error. And someone as thirsty for war as Daemon wouldn't waste an opportunity to terrorize the Greens by formulating a plan that will just alert them that they're still at risk because Aemond was unsuccessfully targeted by 2 random buffoons. So if Daemon wasn't expecting Blood and Cheese to actually kill Aemond, and if he wasn't sending Blood and Cheese on a suicide run, then again, what was the point of everything that he did? At least as far as House of the Dragon's canon goes, it's borderline impossible to argue that Jaehaerys was the true target of Daemon's plans. But it's really only impossible to say that because his choices seem to demonstrate that the target wasn't really what mattered. Jaehaerys was obviously an implied option, as Daemon did distinctly tell Blood and Cheese that he wanted a son for a son. So there are really only so many possible sons to choose from. However, his blasé attitude when coming to the agreement with Blood and Cheese seems to indicate that he didn't care very much what happened. And on some levels, that actually makes a ton of sense. Killing Jaehaerys would understandably be a devastating blow to Aegon and the Greens, but I think that when Daemon returned to King's Landing and assigned his 2 assassins to an impossible assignment, he had done the calculus on what was possible, what Blood and Cheese would realize they were capable of, and based on that estimation, he was fine with however things went. Because, despite their personal or political failings, the adult men who were on the side of the Greens were all far more than capable of defending themselves from 2 completely inexperienced and poor men. Even the drunken Aegon or the aged Otto probably would have decimated them without a problem. Ergo, that means that the potential victims who Blood and Cheese could actually kill is obvious. Alicent, Helaena, Jaehaera, and Jaehaerys are really the only ones who could be overpowered by 2 random men. And any of their deaths would have a similar reward for someone in Daemon's position. Clearly, of those open targets, Jaehaerys is the only one who could qualify as a son for a son. But truly, whatever happened if Blood and Cheese successfully infiltrated the castle and attacked someone weaker than they were would have tactically benefited Daemon. The death of Jaehaerys was probably his best-case scenario, but as long as someone who was considered weak, innocent, or incapable of defending themselves died, his mission would have been successful. So Jaehaerys wasn't his intended victim, but Aemond wasn't either. That still leaves some room for confusion over the events that we see unfold in House of the Dragon, though. Because if Daemon's true intention was never to actually assassinate Aemond, then why would he tell Blood and Cheese to kill him? And there seems to be a few benefits to making Aemond his stated prey. The first and most obvious potential benefit is plausible deniability. Rhaenyra was enraged by the death of Luke, but she specifically named Aemond as the object of her ire. And while she likely wouldn't have cared if most of the Greens wound up dead at that point, she undoubtedly wouldn't have sanctioned the murder of a very young child, both because most remotely rational people wouldn't be okay with that, and because the optics of killing the baby of your rival are terrible. Daemon is likely one of the few people who would be okay with this course of action. As we saw when Balon died, he is more than capable of being shockingly cavalier about the death of the younger members of his family, especially if they come before him in the line of succession. However, by solely stating that Aemond Targaryen is the intended kill, and leaving the rest up to implication alone, he can at least make a surface claim that he did what Rhaenyra commanded. But beyond that, another interesting facet of Blood and Cheese is Blood and Cheese themselves. Daemon returns to King's Landing and finds 2 men to infiltrate the Red Keep, but he chooses 2 completely inexperienced idiots to get the job done. And it's worth asking why that is. There are undoubtedly some genuinely skilled assassins in King's Landing who would have no problem killing anyone, whether it's a child or a woman or Aemond Targaryen himself. There are likely even hireable killers who could give Aemond a run for his money if they caught him off guard. So what would the possible benefit of hiring 2 people who have no idea what they're doing, and have no plan beyond sneaking into the Red Keep, killing a member of the royal family, and then sneaking out? Frankly, the notion that Blood and Cheese would actually be able to escape and collect on their bounty seems absurd. But that might be the exact point of hiring them in the first place. No, I'm not accusing Daemon of being cheap, but I do think that there is actually an upside to his 2 bumbling killers getting caught. These men aren't professionals, and their only appeal is that one of them knows his way around the Red Keep. But sneaking into the chambers of an unsuspecting royal in the dead of night is a far different requirement than sneaking out of a castle that is, at least in theory, heavily guarded by experienced fighters, and would be at full alarm when they were trying to leave. And the fact that they'd be covered in blood after the event because they don't even know enough to try to avoid making a mess of themselves means that it's probably only a matter of time before bloodhounds track them down. Even if by some miracle they manage to make it out, 2 broke and talentless men suddenly being outrageously rich and capable of paying off all of their debts would raise some red flags, and they'd be caught. So, Daemon's stated demands of them might not be about what he wanted them to do, but what he wanted them to tell the Greens that he wanted them to do. And once again, making Aemond his stated target could have some serious tactical benefits to it. Firstly, given that Aemond did kill Luke, it wouldn't exactly be a surprise if the Blacks sent assassins to try to kill him. As far as war moves go, that's actually pretty fair. But this would also foster a potentially massive crack within the Hightower Targaryen faction, and it would leave Aemond alone on one side of it, which is about as good of a position that Daemon and the Blacks could hope for if they couldn't get rid of him outright. If Daemon sent killers into the Red Keep who were after Aemond, but who could and would only be able to attack someone who was innocent and incapable of defending themselves, it essentially puts the responsibility of the death of that person onto Aemond's mistake. It's very easy to hear a confession that Aemond was the real target as vengeance for Luke, but Jaehaerys took his place instead, and translate into a feeling that, regardless of the truth, Aemond is somehow responsible for the death of Jaehaerys. Putting the Greens in a position where they will inevitably at least partially blame Aemond for the death of someone who was defenseless and who they love dearly will certainly unbalance their entire faction, both in terms of their unity with each other, and in terms of their ability to keep a clear head about what steps they want to take next. Sure, killing one of the Greens offers its own benefits, but there is a much greater upside to putting them into disarray and likely isolating the strongest fighter and dragon that they have from the rest of the team. And ironically, as Rhaenyra demonstrated herself, putting a leader in a position where they care more about revenge than they do about winning the war gives their opposition an advantage. And, while Daemon undoubtedly cares for Rhaenyra, it's likely that he pulled a move like this to put himself into a more powerful position with her. As we've already seen, Daemon has no qualms about overstepping his bounds and acting more like a king than a prince consort, and he has always considered his claim to be more powerful and legitimate than hers. Rhaenyra's position was already precarious for a number of reasons, but making her look mercurial and incapable of ruling without letting her impulses get the better of her will further diminish the likelihood of her winning the throne. She was already relying on Daemon to help her, but making her look terrible right at the outset of the war will make her even more reliant on him. It's also obvious that Daemon has been itching for the dance to get more violent, and committing a crime at this level and claiming that it was on Rhaenyra's behalf essentially guarantees that neither side will ever surrender or come to peace terms. He has now put her in a position where she basically has no other choice than to go in dragons blazing. So with one move, he has managed to shift the war in the direction that he wants it to go. So, does that mean that Daemon is still fully culpable for Jaehaerys' death, even if he didn't order Blood and Cheese to kill him? Yes. Jaehaerys may not have been the lone or specific target in his scheme, but he created a scheme where the list of potential victims was incredibly limited, and Jaehaerys was on it. The fact that he didn't say the exact words doesn't magically exonerate him from the reality that he is the one who put this entire scenario together. But, realistically speaking, his plot wasn't really about who would be killed in the first place. It was about the advantages that he could gain in the chaotic aftermath of the murder. It was a move that would almost certainly weaken the Greens, strengthen his own position in the war, and ensure that he got the outright violence that he was craving. And all it took was the implication that Blood and Cheese should find any victim that they could. But what do you think? Does the revelation of Daemon's plan alleviate him from the guilt of Jaehaerys' death? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.